Okay, so thank you so much for anyone who joined. Um, we'll be starting. So, again, my name is Maytal Weiss. I am a part of the business development team here at FreeMind, and today we'll be discussing non-dilutive funding for preclinical research. And maybe a word on FreeMind before we begin. FreeMind, sorry for that. FreeMind has been around for about 20 years now. We have 70 full-time employees and a very diverse client base. Academics, university medical centers, and independent research institutes. But most of the work we do is definitely with the industry. Small startups, large startups, anything from very, very early stage groups all the way up to the big guys. And we submit around 500 grants and government contracts on behalf of our client base every year. And today, and generally, what we try and do with our clients is to help them utilize non-dilutive funding as a strategic financial tool to help you fund your company. We do this by helping you to identify the most relevant funding opportunities, strategizing, maximizing the application's chances of success. We help you manage project production processes, lead the joint application writing, and support the final contract negotiations. So we definitely try and help out with the entire process. And we target a pool of money of about $50 billion in terms of the sources that we go after. Most of it definitely comes from the NIH, a part of the HHS branch. So briefly, the NIH is basically a combination of 27 institutes and centers. I just listed a few here. Definitely there's a lot more. For example, the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, National Institute of Diabetes, Digestive and Kidney Diseases, National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, National Institute of Mental Health, National Institute of Bioimaging and Bioengineering, National Institute of Heart, Lung, and Blood Diseases. The list definitely goes on and on. And also other HSS organizations, for example, BARDA, which is the Biomedical Research and Development Authority, the FDA, the CDC, the NSF, National Science Foundation. We do a lot of work with the DoD as well, the Department of Defense, DARPA, DTRA, CDMRP, and of course everything out there as well. But we also definitely look into private foundations as well, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Michael J. Fox Foundation, ADDF, and definitely many more. And a pretty impressive work that was done in the Milken Institute showed that for every dollar a company wins through these non-dilutive funding sources, government sources, they are then likely to get $8.38 from the private sector. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that statistically, a dollar won through these sources is worth much more than a dollar in the long run. And this is definitely a pretty significant motivation to go after these specific funds. Another very important statistics that I would like to share is that historically 50% of all FDA-approved drugs received government funding at some point during the course of their R&D, making these grants a pretty good indication for future investors as to your likelihood to be successful in terms of getting that FDA approval down the line. And if we look at the NIH's budget for 2018, we'll see that a pretty significant portion of it, $28 billion, go out to fund extramural research. So if we'll even zoom in, into that portion of the budget, what we'll see is that if we look at the categorical spending of the NIH, you'll see that there are definitely a lot of indications here. And the take-home message from this slide, from this graph, is to be able to show you that basically any type of research project that you can come up with will probably be funded by the NIH. And this is definitely just a specific part of the different things that they fund. But definitely anything that's new, that's innovative, is very much welcome within the NIH. And the thing that sets these organizations apart from other types of investors is that they are definitely interested in the early stages of the project as well. So what we'll be doing here in the next 30 minutes or so is to go over some opportunities that will hopefully be very relevant to all of you out there in the early stages of the work. So among the top relevant opportunities with the NIH are the R21, the R01, and the SBIR STTR programs. The R21 is the early stage exploratory novel studies, high risk, high reward opportunity. In terms of the award itself, it is up to $275,000 plus indirect costs. That basically means that on top of that, you can add another portion of the indirect costs. And that definitely changes. For example, for foreign entities, it's about 8%. Domestic organizations typically see 30-40% on top of the $275,000. And some universities have more than another 100% on top of that. In terms of the duration of the project, it is up to 2 years. And so that's the R21. The R1 is the later stage research and the longer term projects. The budget is up to about $2.5 million plus indirect costs. And they actually just removed the budget cap from the R1. The reason that we're including that is just to give you a proportion of the size of award. But if you look into the R01 solicitation, you will not see a budget cap. Although it is for later stage research, it is definitely a good place to go if you are in the preclinical stage, because a lot of the work that they do is still in the preclinical area of the project. So definitely look that up as well. Another type of opportunities is the SBIR and STTR programs. These are opportunities specifically designed for small businesses. The SBIR is for a small business to make sure that you are able to advance your work, and STTR is a collaboration between academia and the industry. They're divided into a phase 1 and a phase 2. A phase 1 is $225,000. And a phase 2 is up to $1.5 million. And of course, we'll go into all of that in a minute. So just to zoom in on the R21, basically this is the NIH's exploratory and developmental grant. It supports exploratory developmental research projects by providing support for very early stage and conceptual stage of these projects. These studies may involve considerable risk, but of course may hopefully lead to a breakthrough in a particular area or the development of a novel technique, agents, methodologies, models, and applications that could have a major impact on the field of biomedical, behavioral, or clinical research. So again, we're talking about very early stages, and I just wanted to show you, this is just the print screen of the R21 solicitation. And what you can see here is the institutes taking part in this very, very general solicitation. And I'm sure you can appreciate how broad the description is, and that's on purpose. The NIH wants you to pitch your idea. They want to review that. They want to make sure that they're not boxing you in into something that they thought of before. And they do believe that this is how amazing science gets appreciated. So these are the institutes taking part here, just to give you a few names. So for example, the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, the National Institute of Nursing Research, and basically many other institutes as well. So that's the R21. Another another opportunity that we discussed is the RO one. That is the NIH research project grant that supports this discrete, specified, and basically a project in the areas that they're interested in. The purpose of the project must be, of course, related to the programmatic inserts of the NIH, at least one or more. And again, this is the print screen of the solicitation itself. You can see that they definitely have quite a few here. Just to give you a few other names, we'll get to the 27 by the end of the presentation. So, for example, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. You can see the National Institute of Diabetes, Digestive and Kidney Diseases that we mentioned before. Child Health and Development Institutes, and definitely many more. To zoom in on the SBIR and STTR solicitations, so the SBIR and the STTRs, again, are for small businesses. The SBIR program is a collaboration of the NIH, the CDC, the FDA, and the ACF. And it's basically a small business innovation research grant applications. You have the parent SBIR, and I included the solicitation numbers to make sure that everything is accessible when we're done here. The STTR is the Omnibus Solicitation of the NIH for Small Businesses Technology Transfer Grant Applications. And basically the idea is that these two programs can help us get from bench to bedside. They do acknowledge the fact that a lot of amazing work is done within the industry and not in the academia, and a lot of projects, by the way, especially early stage projects, have some kind of synergy between the academic group that maybe developed the technology, or maybe started researching a specific idea, and the company that helps commercialize that idea. So that's what the SBIR and STTR programs are here to do. In terms of the deadlines, there are 3 deadlines that are relevant to them. The next ones for both the SBIR and STTR are September 5th. And they have 3 deadlines throughout the year: January, April, and September. In terms of the guidelines, so as I told before, there are guidelines, and in terms of the awards, there are specific sizes, but you can also increase the amount that they're suggesting by 50% if you're able to justify it. Another very important element in terms of SBIR, STTR eligibility is that you need to be a U.S. small business, and by small they mean under 500 employees. You also have to be majorly owned by U.S. citizens or U.S. residents. All of the work needs to be done within the U.S. So if you have some kind of collaboration overseas, that's unfortunately not a good fit for the SBIR, STTR programs. And because the focus of these opportunities is to help you advance the business or the collaboration, so for phase 1 SBIR or STTR, for phase 1 SBIR, you need to have the work, or most of the work, 67% of the work, done in-house. And if you're doing a phase 2, at least 50% of the work needs to be done in-house. The next thing that I would like to talk about is virtual companies. So that is a problem for many of the very early stage companies that, in terms of their business model, outsource a lot of the work they do to vendors, CROs, collaborators from outside the company. And I'm sure that some of you that are reading this just say, well, you know what, that's not relevant for us. There's no way that we'll allocate 67% of the work we do in-house. So there are ways to get around that if the outsourcing is a part of your business model. So, if you have any specific questions regarding that, of course, feel free to use the chat and ask anything you want. And we'll go into the specifics. But there are ways for virtual companies to submit these grants. It's pretty routine. Another thing you need to do is have a commercialization plan, and that's for the SBIR phase 2. Because they are industry focused, they want to see how you plan to materialize the work that you'll do as a part of the project. By the way, the SBIR STTR program are 3.65% of the entire agency budget by law. That means that both the NIH, DoD, and NSF, they have to allocate a specific percentage of their budget to fund these programs, and that's great for the industry. That number actually rises a little bit every year, so that's definitely a plus. Another type of opportunities that I would like to talk about is the non-SBIR ones. So there is a program with the DoD called the CDMRP, stands for the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs. That program comes out once a year, and basically we're talking about very, very diverse topics. And I know that it's not completely intuitive, but the DoD also takes care of veterans and their family members. So their scope of interest is almost as wide as the NIH's. They have a wonderful oncology program, a lot of work with neurodegeneration, orphan indications, and definitely a lot out there. Look up their website. It is incredibly informative. I believe the list of topics this year was over 50 topics that they happily funded. So definitely make sure that you're including them. And secondly, broad agency announcements. Other specific or relatively broad topics that works both for the DoD and other agencies. The budgets, of course, change according to the solicitation. Typically speaking, for early stage work, we're usually talking about $200,000-$300,000 for the very early stages, and the awards can get to a few millions if you're able to justify that as well. And I just wanted to show you some specific solicitations because we, until now, we spent most of our time talking about very broad opportunities, but of course, there are very specific ones as well. So the first one I wanted to show you, and I tried to make it as diverse as possible. Lead optimization and preclinical development of therapeutic candidates for diseases of interest for the NIDDK. And just a reminder, the NIDDK is the National Institute of Diabetes, Digestive, and Kidney Diseases. So we are talking about up to a little over $200,000 in phase 1, and the phase 2 is $1.5 million. And the maximum duration of the phase 1 is 6 months, and the phase 2 is 2 years. Another one that I would like to show you is an opportunity for synthetic biology for engineering applications, and that's an R01. Again, I included the solicitation numbers as well. So there's definitely a lot out there for bioengineering devices as well. With this R01, similar to other R01s, there is no official budget cap, but similar to what I showed you before, definitely think about $2-3 million as the general cap. If you are able to justify more, definitely make sure that you're reaching out to the program officers, making sure that it makes sense to them. And the reason that they decided to remove the budget caps is to encourage you to talk to them and see whether or not it makes sense. So I wouldn't hesitate contacting the people running these programs, asking them their opinion, and worst case scenario, coming back to the $2-3 million cap. Another specific opportunities that I saw is the Create Bio development track. Non-clinical and early stage clinical development for biologics, and that is a mechanism called the U01. You are able to include a clinical trial. You are definitely not obligated to do so. There is no budget cap as well. And you can also add on to that the indirect component that I mentioned before. The fourth one is metabolic programming to improve immunotherapy. That is another R01. Again, no budget cap. You include indirect costs. And the maximum duration is 5 years. So just to show you how we can use these mechanisms for specific companies, or maybe to show you how companies can utilize everything that I mentioned here to really have a strategy for them, I included a couple case studies to show you how a company can utilize these sources. So the first one is a company called Back to the Future. Just a bit about the company itself. US-based company, 17 employees. They were able to raise $5 million in a Series A, developing novel broad-spectrum antibiotics for use against drug-resistant bacteria, which I do hope you'll appreciate is definitely a pretty major concern these days. In terms of the development stage, they did test their compound in vivo and validated it in animal study. The next steps in their R&D plan is to initiate an ADME tox studies as a part of their IND package. So what they could do is a few of these, they can look up a few of these opportunities. So first of all, in terms of the NIH, they can definitely apply to NIAID, which is the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, both the SBIR and STTR program, if relevant, of course, and the parent R01 announcement that we mentioned before. Definitely a good match for that. Another agency outside the NIH is something called USAMRAC. That is the U.S. Army Medical Research and Material Command. There is a broad agency announcement, that's the BAA, for extramural medical research, and they can definitely apply there as well. The CDMRP, the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs that we mentioned before, for military infectious diseases research programs, MIDRP. Another initiative is something called CARB-X. I mentioned BARDA before, and BARDA is basically a government agency that is here to keep the U.S. citizens safe from any biological, chemical, nuclear attack, and they are definitely interested in anything regarding antibiotics-resistant bacteria. They have an initiative called CARB-X that deals with that specifically. So the BARDA organization itself typically help fund late-stage work, but they opened up CARB-X a couple years ago to make sure that they are able to help early-stage research as well. So that definitely CARB-X. And the last one is something called the Wellcome Trust. It is a UK initiative. They do amazing work, so definitely this company should submit to them as well. The second company that I would like to show you is an earlier stage company called OnCare T LLC. So basically this is a small US company, 3 co-founders that are the employees. They invested themselves and they were able to raise $1 million from friends and family. No major investors yet. And they are developing immunotherapy approach for treatment of breast cancer. In terms of the development stage, the company has developed and engineered the CAR T cells. And in terms of the next steps of the R&D plan, they basically want to test their work and their cells in vivo, want to determine the efficiency of their treatment. So definitely the NCI with the NIH, the National Cancer Institute, they can start with the parent R01 that we definitely covered. Another thing they can do is they can submit a fast track SBIR, which is basically a phase 1 and a phase 2 combined together. that's the solicitation number. And just a specific program, metabolic programming to improve immunotherapy. They can also submit to the CDMRP, the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs. I told you that the CDMRP comes out once a year, but the only indication that comes out twice a year is breast cancer. So if you're in the area of breast cancer, I would definitely check out the CDMRP website every now and again to see if the opportunities came out, if you are able to submit. And of course, also the Breast Cancer Research Foundation. They do amazing work, and definitely that's definitely a very good place to go. So a few words on the NIH's review process, and maybe I'm going to talk about the NIH, but you can definitely consider a lot of this for all of the sources that we target. So I know that we think about government agencies as the government, but these are definitely investors. They invest in your technology, they invest in your work, in your research, to make sure that they're able to benefit. And of course, the clients in these situations are us, U.S. citizens. So when you think about a review process, it's not just a matter of having someone review the science that you do. Think of it as a risk assessment process. They want to make sure that the strength of the application is more significant than the risk of funding it. They definitely have the privilege of investing in early stage companies, unlike a lot of the VCs and I want to say traditional investors that we typically think about when we're talking about funding the business that we have. If you go and you look to these investors, they are interested in much earlier stage work, which is a great plus. Of course, if you're interested in funding a preclinical stage work. And you'll be surprised at how early stage you can be when you approach these agencies. And when they want to make sure that the work you do is compliant with what they want to see, they have a five review criteria that they look to. So the first one, the most important one, is the scientific approach. What are you planning to do? Is it new? Is it impressive? Is it something that will probably be able to hold? And as you're presenting the problem, you have to make sure that you're explaining the significance of it. Of course, curing cancer is very important, but you have to be very specific. You have to explain why the work that you plan on doing will basically change the world if things work out. Another very important element is the innovation part. How do you plan to solve the problem that you're talking about? They do want to see you using a new method, something that's, of course, risky, but also impressive. So that's definitely the innovation part. Another very important element is the leadership. Who will be seeing the project through? Of course, you can basically hypothesize the most amazing project, but if the team making that project a reality will not be able to do that and have that project move along, of course they will not want to give you the money. And last but not least is the environment factor. If you are planning a microscopy-based project and you do not have an impressive microscope, of course that will not look good in your application. If you are planning a specific experiment that requires a specific tool that you do not have access to, of course you will not be able to see the project through, and that's definitely something that they'll be looking at. Having said that, and I know that, of course, many of you do not have a high standard facility. Of course, you do a lot of outsourcing as well, which is fine. if you are able to show them that you have an environment that can support the project that you're suggesting, that's great, even if it's not in-house. So make sure that you do have that in mind. And so I know that I only talked about non-dilutive funding here, but of course we do advise a balanced campaign. Of course, go to angels, go to the public markets, go to VCs, but you cannot disregard the non-dilutive funding aspect of that equation. And if you do go after non-dilutive funding, make sure that you are maximizing your chances to be successful. Seek insight into the interests and goals of the funding agencies. I included the solicitation numbers. If you look up those numbers, what you'll see is a very, very long page that describes exactly what they want to see. Make sure that you understand what they're looking for. Make sure that you're compliant with that. You don't want to waste your time submitting to an agency that will not accept the work you're suggesting because it's just not what they're looking for. You have to make sure that as you're suggesting a plan, and let's just say that you found a solicitation, you definitely understand what they're asking, and you're suggesting a project that is perfect what they want to see. If that does not work with your personal long-term plan in terms of where you want the company to go, that might be a problem as well. You have to make sure that you're suggesting something that makes sense for you as well. It's not just a matter of being able to win the money, it's to make sure that you are able to win money to help you get to where you want to go. Before you even begin, you have to make sure that you're identifying everything you have in terms of the different funding opportunities, and make sure that you are planning and executing a long-term multi-submission granting strategy. If you know that you are in a field that has many different candidates in terms of where you can submit the grant, submit to all of them. A few slides back, I showed you the oncology company. Of course, they'll submit to the NIH, but they should also submit to the DoD. They should also look up private foundations as well. Make sure that you understand the key players in the field that you have. And of course, as you do that, in terms of writing the application itself, you have to make sure that they understand that you understand what you're doing. So you have to know your weaknesses. Of course, if you're a very small company and you have a very strong competitor, that is maybe an advantage, maybe a disadvantage, but you have to understand exactly where you stand and not avoid talking about the problems that you may have along the way. Make sure that you're focused. Here are the different elements that might be a challenge. Here's what I plan to do to overcome that challenge, how I'm going to solve this problem that might arise. If you're talking about an experiment that could go wrong, talk about what you'll do if that thing does go wrong. And being aware of the work you do and its limitations is actually a plus here, because they'll see that you do know where you're getting into. You have to find the right partners if necessary. If you are a small company and you feel that in order to be successful, you need to show that you have everything in-house, that might be a problem as the application is reviewed. If you are planning a kidney-based program and you do not have in-house anyone that is an expert in terms of that specific kidney indication, that will look bad when the application is reviewed. So make sure that you're aware of that as well. And again, know the interests of the funding agency and the mechanism. For example, if you are planning something that does not have a collaboration with academia, you cannot submit an STTR. If you know that the agency is only interested in a specific subset of questions and you're doing something else, your application will not be awarded. Another very important element that's sometimes overlooked, unfortunately, is the administrative parts. So I wrote here not important, but obviously it is incredibly important. These are government agencies, and there's a lot of signing into things, making sure that you know the guidelines, and there are plenty of guidelines to know. So you have to make sure that you understand that part as well. Speaking as a former grant consultant here in FreeMind, I can tell you that these things might take a lot of time, but you want to make sure that they're done correctly, because you will not be able to submit the grant if you don't have all your ducks in a row. And that's a very important tip, especially if you're just getting started with these things. You also have to establish yourself, of course, as a top researcher, but you also have to be an experienced manager. If you're submitting a grant that the duration of the experiment itself, or the work that you're suggesting, is about 2 years long, they do want to make sure that you'll be able to manage all of the moving parts. Even if you're doing most of it in-house, of course you'll need some kind of a CRO. Of course you'll need the help of some kind of consultant, and of course you'll have your team. They want to see that the PI of the application is able to maximize all of the potential of their team and is able to be the leader of the work that you're suggesting. And of course, you have to think about ways to reduce the risk of being selected for funding. As I told you before, this is a risk management process for them as well. Understand that. Make sure that you are addressing the, I want to say, risky part for them, but make sure that they are able to trust you. And that is definitely a very, very important element here. And you also have to be able to market yourself. Of course, a grant talks about science, but it's not a scientific document. It is a marketing document. If you're not able to make the work you do shine through the pages that the reviewer is reading, it'll probably not be awarded. And that's just, an unfortunate truth. These people read a lot of applications. You want to make sure that when they read yours, that is the one that they remember. That is the one that gets them excited. And that's how you get funded. So in terms of, after about 20 years of doing this, I guess that the three important elements, in our humble opinion, is to identify all the relevant funding opportunities even before you even begin. Make sure that you list all of them and create a multi-submission granting strategy. More shots on goal will definitely improve your chances. You can definitely, submit an application, cross your fingers, hope for the best. But that's not how you really use these opportunities and use these sources as a funding source, and as basically a way to fund your company, and basically level that next to going after VCs, going after angel foundations. And that's how you leverage these sources into a financial strategy. And of course, make sure that you're submitting as many top quality applications as possible. It doesn't make sense to hit the send button if the application is not polished. Take the time. Don't leave everything for the last minute, as of course we all do. Make sure that you're planning ahead. And in that aspect, having that long-term strategy definitely helps. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining. We definitely have more webinars coming. We have a LinkedIn page, we have a Twitter account, and we have a YouTube channel with all of our presentations, past and someday future. So we see that we have a few questions here. Okay, so first question, can someone that's a U.S. citizen but is not currently living in the U.S. submit an SBIR? So unfortunately, no. You have to do the work in the U.S. All the money needs to be allocated to the U.S. in the U.S. Okay. What are the deadlines for the R1s? So I'm sorry I failed to mention this. The R1s and the R21s have 3 deadlines throughout the year: February, June, and October. The R1 is always on the 5th, and the R21 is on the 16th. So the next major R1 deadline is October 5th, and the next R21 deadline is on October 16th. And it is worth mentioning that some of these opportunities have non-standard deadlines. So as you go into the solicitation, you can see the deadlines. Most of them will say standard deadlines apply. If not, it will specify the deadlines that you can submit at. And I guess this is it for now. Thank you so much for joining. I will send you the slide decks as soon as we're done here. And have a great day. Bye.